Have you ever been to some of these planning meetings or some of these public forums? I mean, they're really boring. I've been to so many lately, and it's hard to sit through. And if they're not boring, they are daunting. So they're inaccessible, I think, to the average citizen that would want to actually comment because it's a little daunting or a little bit too formal. So I think the idea and the use of play to make things more accessible and more engaging is really, really, really important.
I'm pleased to welcome back Mike Ross, who's best known at the BSA as our stalwart moderator. But also, he was a city councilor for 14 years. I got to know Mike in that capacity when he was seeking advice about urban planning issues many years ago. Mike also writes regularly for the Boston Globe opinion pieces that are always excellent. And he's also an attorney at Prince Lobel Thai LLP. So without further ado, Mike Ross.
It's good to see you again. And Tim, we're here because of you, and Gretchen, and Sarah. Because you set the topics, and you do so based on what's happening in our community. And tonight we actually have a real exciting night. The word is engagement, and our panelists here were chosen for their ability to engage, but also to plan and to design. And collectively, they've done some creative things to further that job. They engaged in public planning exercises such as street festivals. They produced films, handed out books, held endless public arts projects. And one of them placed a time machine in the middle of a town square and used it as a form of engagement for young citizens to talk about planning. But creativity isn't everything. After all, during the urban renewal days here in Boston, the Boston Redevelopment Authority produced a comic book to tell the residents of the West End that they should leave because their neighborhood was filled with rats and was part of urban decay. So that was creative. Very creative. But it wasn't engagement. And it was fear, really. So what have we learned about planning since then? We're actually going to find out. Because in Boston, they are engaging in their first planning exercise since 50 years ago. And also, so is Cambridge. And also, I think, Somerville and Revere. All planning. It appears that Boston's current version of planning in 2015 is much kinder and gentler than its 1965 version. In fact, the director, Brian Golden, on behalf of the BRA, recently went to apologize to the residents of the West End for messing up planning the last time, and perhaps for that comic book, and he's vowing to get it right this time. So what does getting it right look like? For starters, it's engagement. From the ground up, not from the top down. But to give us a more in-depth and a better look at what it looks like and what getting it right looks like, we have a really all-star panel here. So let's see. I'm going to do this this way. Our first speaker is Kate Bowlig, who's on the far end over there. She has the coolest name of her group, the Department of Play. She is from GSD. She co-founded the Department of Play, which is a Boston-based group that creates play zones in unclaimed public spaces to foster engagement between citizens and government. We have next to her Ken Snyder from Place Matters, which is a Denver nonprofit think tank around engagement. And he came in for this, and it's good to see you, Ken. And then we have Mariko, right? Mariko Davidson is running for city council 1 week from tonight, right? You have an election a week from tonight for the Cambridge City Council.
Yes.
But she figured she'd come by tonight and just kind of drop some information with us. You're not busy, right?
No.
All right. But Mariko is she's the Emerson Engagement Lab.
Yeah.
MIT educated, and former urban mechanic from the city of Boston, running for city council. And then Lizzie McWillie, coming from Texas, a Texas nonprofit called Building Community Workshop. And Lizzie, you and Kate were in school together, right? So that's our panel. And the Boston Architectural College, as was mentioned, helped get Ken and Lizzie here. So we're glad you're here to join us. Kate, you're going to kick us off, so why don't we start with you?
So I was practicing as an artist, and I was really interested in ideas of public imagination. And that, when I started studying planning, became thinking about the vision for a city. Who holds the vision? And when we do engagement, we often ask people to talk about their present realities, and then often what ends up happening is that planners in their closed offices then come up with a vision plan for how to address the problems that people have come up with. And so I was really interested in getting the public that I was working with to actually begin to imagine and envision the world that they wanted to live in. So my talk is called Exploring Other Worlds. Other Worlds is a very early science fiction book where the man envisions flying to the moon and encountering other civilizations. So I was working with a lot of young people and a lot of interactions in public space, and I realized that when you ask someone to imagine the future, it's really an unfair question. Because in order to imagine the future, we first feel like we have to sort of solve all the problems of the present, and that becomes insurmountable. Obviously, we would all be out of jobs. So I thought, how else could we do it? And then I went to Mexico City and became a time traveler. This is what was alluded to in the introduction. So a friend and I, who was from Mexico City, became time traveling curators from 2068. We were en route to 1968, which in Mexico is a very historic year as elsewhere, but because of the student protests, and for a number of reasons, it's sort of a very key moment in Mexican history. So 2068 commemorates 100 years, kind of implying how are we going to remember what the events of 68. And my friend and I were time traveling, but our time machine crashed in 2012. And we arrive in Mexico City with total amnesia. So we took to the streets and started to ask people to help us remember the year that we came from. And the results were amazing. Suddenly, they would ask us, so what institution are you from? And we'd say, Museum of the Future, Museo del Futuro. And they go, oh, okay. And then they'd start to imagine and tell us exactly what the world that we were living in would look like. So as you can see, we were using kind of theatrical performance art tools, and the result was really astounding because people were able to kind of put themselves in this other moment instantly without feeling that need to figure out what was barring them from the better world. So then we worked with a group of over 100 youth from the periphery of the city building this time machine so that we could go home. And what ended up happening was that the project got sort of taken over by local art teachers, and it became a series of workshops in very informal communities that struggle for running water and electricity and have lots of social strife and economic strife. And they took on this idea of past, present, and future as a whole summer of courses around imagining the city. The awesome thing that happened after that is my collaborator became city planner officially and was the second in command to the chief city planner of Mexico City and ended up working on the master plan. So that's her as a time traveler on the left, all the way on the left, and then she ended up using some of what we learned in informing the public engagement strategy in the actual master planning process. So that was really great. And when I came back to the States, I became increasingly interested in relaunching this Department of Play, and I worked with collaborator Maria Vidar Delgado, who's an anthropologist, and we started to think about how do we encourage this kind of imagination and this visioning in public space. We thought the idea of the public was really key. These are spaces, these are spaces that are often sort of taken for granted and places that are perhaps not territorialized by any one group, but where some kind of dialogue could happen. So Department of Play is a lost city department. We are in search of a city that might have a Department of Play. So we make irresistible, intergenerational, aesthetically appealing temporary play zones. So we're exploring these ideas of public space and imagining the city through play engagements in public space. And we are a collective. We're just now about a year or two old, and so we're still really exploring what that means. When you say Department of Play, everybody gets some idea of what that is, so we're careful in defining what it is to not take away your idea of it, and instead we say we're searching for it. So what we do is we build play worlds that help us reimagine ours. So this is an example. In the beginning, the first year, we really spent trying to understand how engagement in public space works from more of kind of that irresistible factor. What makes something that you can't just walk by and ignore on your busy way to wherever. So this was a really simple shadow puppet display that we did in downtown Boston at the head of the theater district, where every time the light turned red, we would run out and have these shadow puppets. We had like 20 puppets that we'd give to people, and they would walk across the street, and the cars who got it would start to use their high beams to help us do the stage lighting for the shadow puppets. So really quick, there was no narrative. It was just, does this work? It was December. It was really cold and gloomy. And it worked. People were really involved. We were able to engage, many unexpected passersby. The second project that we did, we created these blocks, and the prompt here was help us build prototypes for the first Martian cities. So we know there's some aspiration about traveling to Mars one day, so we tried that with a prompt, again, other worlds, right? Let's not talk about the present. This was in Somerville, actually. Let's not worry about the present and trying to think about what do we really need to make our life better, but let's say we had to start from scratch as a whole new society. What would we want? So that was the kind of conversation that we had using these blocks. You see a little kid here, and people as tiny as 1 or 2 years old would play with us, and then adults as well would join, and everybody kind of centered around this prompt. And the blocks we've used several times since then. They've proven really popular as kind of thinking tools, and these also helped us realize that a way that we enjoy working is not just talking about these ideas and imagining the way that we started in Mexico City, but really getting people to build these moments of other worlds. So again, temporary play zones, I meant to say this earlier, we're interested in how art and these moments of suspension create spaces where people who are walking by in a public space kind of unexpectedly can exit their everyday reality and try on another way of relating, another way of existing, and kind of detach themselves for the moment from their rituals, from their everyday kind of occurrences. So that's kind of I think that's the power of art and creative engagement, is that it creates these kind of ruptures in the way that things are, from which we can then look back on our everyday life and say, hey, is there something that we want to change here? So the following one was a snow fort building right on the border of Roxbury and the South End. This was during our many snowstorms last winter. We decided to reinterpret our relationship with the snow, as one of our collaborators put it. And we built a snow fort, we built snow tunnels and snowmen. And this was great because we had actually a few people from the city came and played with us. And this was sort of a pop-up event. We did some advertising, and it was kind of whoever showed up and wanted to play for 6 hours in the snow. And the interesting part here, we began to think as Department of Play around border zones. So as we know, Boston is a city of neighborhoods, and there are these very, in a way, solid and disputed borders in between neighborhoods that are sometimes encroaching on one another. Sometimes within neighborhoods, you have certain streets that operate as borders. And there are tensions that surface around these borders. So we became increasingly interested in those borders, which are kind of liminal spaces in transition, and for better or for worse. And we wanted to produce, through play, again, these suspensions where we didn't have to have a community meeting to talk about the future, but we could actually start to come together and build it, and then talk about each of our individual stakes in it. So this will inform a little bit later on our project. So this is a project called Boxtopia that we did this summer. We were expressing Boston Fellows with the Design Studio for Social Intervention, which was an awesome experience. Aya is there from the studio. And we did Boxtopia in Codman Square, where we brought 400 cardboard boxes onto a vacant lot at the edge of a residential neighborhood, and just sort of showed up with the idea of building Boston in 2130. So instead of 2030, where what all the plans are focusing on, we wanted to think about kind of the farther away future, again, to free up the imagination, to change the stakes from solving the immediate looming crises among us, but to think bigger about where we might want to be as a society in that 115 years. So that was an all-day event. People came and built. We learned a lot through that process in terms of collaborating. I know when we were talking, we thought about some questions, and one is how do you collaborate? And this was a really big learning process for us because we partnered up with a community development corporation and their community organizing team. So learning from them how it works to do events within an organizational kind of territory. And this was a vacant lot at the edge of the neighborhood. And throughout our day, people from the immediate street next to it started to ask us, why can't we use this space? Why, it's usually behind a locked fence. And we said, we don't know. Why don't we talk about it? So these questions came up that were, we think, very important and often very unasked. And we're interested, again, in how play can elicit these questions in through a seemingly innocuous situation. So that's something that we're thinking about more proactively as we continue to develop our interruptions. And the next day we worked with this actor, Vincent Siders, who was the Minister of Play from 2130. So he took the Fairmont commuter rail. He emerged from the land of Boxtopia that we had built the day before. And he took the train talking with people as this time traveler and asking them also to talk with him about the future of the city. So that was a really fun and intense experience. Boston commuters are not the most keen on talking to performance artists. So then this summer we got the chance to work with the city's planning process, the cultural planning process, Boston Creates. And that was a collaboration. We literally, as Boxtopia was about to go live, we got invited to join that process far along into it. So they were, I think, about to launch publicly the next day, the initial town hall. And we got invited, and our roles were these. And this was really a work in progress, defining how do you engage artists officially in a planning process. So we'd always work kind of on the side. We're aware of city issues, et cetera, but now we were officially being invited in. So these were the goals. I won't read them. You can see them. And so we were playing this role kind of between a creative consultant, like advising the various planning groups within this effort, and then also trying to make a creative intervention of our own. So we started by, as you saw earlier, we like blocks. So we took the logo of Boston Creates, just the B, and we created that as a block. And we started to deploy that at various public events, again with the idea of imagining. We noticed that the planning process was asking for a lot of data from the public, like where do you see art, what do you do creatively, where do you live, where do you work, and so on. And we wanted to again push it into the what do you imagine. So we created these blocks. And then the second part was the planning process had an online component that you can see right here, which had all of these, again, kind of information gathering. I get inspired here. Tell us about the present. So we added this future component of I imagine something here. And then what we did is we took the I imagine something here. Sometimes people would pin their ideas to the map of what they imagine. Sometimes they would build with these blocks. And we started to take those and ask them to specifically put them on the map, right? So they were tagged geographically. And then we would print them, credit the person who wrote it as much as we had data for, and then actually put them on site. So that we kind of wanted to honor the ideas that may be super abstract, really playful, or very serious, and put them exactly on the location where the person had imagined them. So we created these other curator ladies of sort of like present or past future, and went around the city hanging those up in these framed things. And Leo, I'm crediting Leo on the bottom there. He's the photographer that we brought on also to document the planning process because there was all the civic engagement happening and we needed to have kind of a formal documentary process, which was awesome. So, this was really fun. This was really entertaining. People stopped and were suddenly really curious to talk with us. And when they heard about the planning process, they wanted to know more. Oh, I didn't know this was happening in the city. Tell me more. So it was kind of a good tactic. But then it got really... we were able to get beyond it in certain instances. Like this example, it started with us kind of like taking photos, haha, funny. And then, but this was in JP on the site of a vacant brewery. And this is the idea that somebody had about a neighborhood hub, like a crowdsourced creative economy type idea. And this man came up to us and said, why do they want to do this here? This is across the street from the projects. And so we said, well, we don't know, let's think about it. And then he started to go on the website, that's him on the site right there, and he actually was able to ask through a comment this woman who had posted this idea, what tell me more about this, why are you picking this as the site of your idea? So that was a really great moment for us because it furthered the dialogue and brought this abstract notion of a creative planning process right to the street that might be very much affected by the planning process. So overall, what we're working on is how do the decisions that we make today affect our long-term vision for the city, right? So this is what we're talking about, not necessarily the next 15 years, but the long now. Where are we going as a society? Where are we going as a people? That didn't come out very well. So what we're kind of tackling, we've kind of learned what works in terms of the fun, playful interactions, and now we're starting to get a little bit more intentional and thinking about how many of the people making the decisions about the city currently live or think about the city in this, which if you're familiar with Boston maps, you will know this is like the northern half of the city, and don't think about the entire geographic scope, down all the way down to Hyde Park. So we're thinking about how do we ensure that this next planning effort that happens isn't focused on this central part, if you will, of Boston, but really takes for granted the entire geography of the city. So we're starting our next major effort is we were awarded an Our Place America grant in 2015, which we're very excited about, and that'll give us the ability to really focus this work and be really intensely engaged with this next process, which is awesome that it's happening at the same time as the actual planning process. But we want to focus on these three areas, Andrew Square, Upham's Corner, and Fields Corner, which all of them are what could be called border areas. There's a lot of boundaries and again, liminal spaces within them, but also they're not that in dialogue with one another, even though they're all within a mile of one another. So we're thinking about how do we continue to create this kind of vision, this is such a thing as a collective vision possible for the city that comes from the residents. And so we wanted to work across the whole city, but there's only two of us, and we were told we can't start with the whole city. So we had to pick a place, and we thought these three areas were particularly fruitful for us. So we're starting there, but by no means do we want to end there. And I think I will stop there. Thanks.
So I graduated from college in 1988, and it just so happened to be the same time that James Hansen, in June of 1988, was from NASA, the chief climatologist, did his famous Senate speech, where it was one of the first federal employees to really call out climate change as a serious threat to the planet and to our economy. And I got a job in Washington, D.C., working with the National Audubon Society, and there was a number of follow-up meetings. So I wasn't at the seminal meeting, but in the weeks following that, there were several meetings that James Hansen had done on the House side as well. And so I was able to go to those. And actually, that was kind of even preferable because they were more of an intimate setting and we could be more involved in the Q&A. One of the handouts, though, that he had that was just really struck me was the slides looking at extreme storm events and understanding how extreme storm events are affected, not just the probability of occurrence, but also looking at increased variability and also the frequency of those storms. And it really just hit me hard that this was an issue that we're going to have to be figuring out how to grapple with. And so it launched my sort of interest in looking at solutions to climate change. One of the advantages of this is, I see some young people in the audience. National Audubon Society was my second choice, but the advantage was that I got to work in an organization that had a small DC office. And so within less than 6 months, I actually got to be National Audubon Society's representative on climate change, which is quite a job right out of college. It meant that I was traveling to Geneva, Nairobi, New York, and following the climate negotiations. It was quite an intense experience, and it really helped shape my thoughts and thinking about what sort of things we need to focus on. But one of the things that became clear over time was that the renewable energy technology was one thing, and thinking about energy efficiency. But one of the single most important things that we can do is create walkable, bikeable, livable communities. And even just from the energy greenhouse gas perspective, there's just amazing sort of research showing the huge savings that can be enjoyed by making our communities more walkable and bikeable. An EPA research project showed that, or one project that was looking at EPA relocating in a sub-region in one of their regional areas, where one of the main objectives of relocating was to build a LEED platinum building. And yet when they studied the energy that was saved by the building and its green features, and then compared it to the increase in energy from the employees having to get to the building that was now further away, all those savings were lost. And so it's important to think about that full aggregate number in terms of things that you're looking at. But also, it's really important, walkable communities, because it has such an amazing amount of win-win benefit aspects to it. And so it really has huge health, but quality of life and community building components to it. So the mascot, probably one of the best mascots for walkability and livability and quality of life is this guy, Manny Salzman, to the right, who lives in Denver. Happens to be actually my landlord in about 5 days. But he is actually 97 years old, and he every day takes his bike and rides it up an incredibly steep hill, and uses that as a way to get his exercise. But he has been an advocate for walkability, bikeability in Denver for a huge amount of time, and he's been able to do some incredible things with that. And so aging in place and community engagement and even what I like to call happiness-oriented development are all kind of embodied in some of the things that folks like Manny Salzman have helped make possible. This bridge that we're looking at was going to be torn down, and Manny was the champion that said, no, we need that bridge for walking and biking. And so that plaque right behind is actually the plaque that in 2004, they named the bridge after him, so it's Manny's Bridge. And it is truly one of the important sort of elements of creating a walkable, livable landscape. So with Place Matters, we focus on empowering communities with the knowledge and tools to create thriving neighborhood streets and resilient communities. And the way we do that is to think about that whole range of tools and techniques, some of them very high tech and some of them very high touch. And times it's the combination that really matters. And part of it too is to figure out how to bring information into the conversation at the right time so that you're making informed decisions. You're also inspiring people to do new things and new ideas, and that collectively the group together can think of ideas that no one individual would have been able to do by themselves. And so those are key pieces of it. So with that, in the area of informed and engaged decision-making, one sort of exercise that we really enjoy doing, we call a walk shop. And it's basically taking and combining a number of different tools and techniques, and it's gotten a lot easier with everybody having smartphones in their pockets. But it's an opportunity for people to go out in the morning, walk around with design experts and historians and people who understand why certain things were built in certain places and the history of those, but then use the cameras and their phones to take pictures and document the things that they like and the things that they want to change. And use that, though, then to be the kickoff of a meeting to talk about those things. And what we find is just by having people walking around and taking pictures and just the act of framing them and thinking about it, that brings that information in that's fresh in their heads, not to mention they've just been walking around so the blood's pumping through their veins. And then you're able to have a much more engaged conversation about what it is, what you want to do, what you want to change. With the internet apps that are now available, we're able to do a lot more with that. And this is where I'll wrap up with sort of some more ideas about how you try to go through several iterations of thinking about different design solutions, but also getting information that'll help it. But a key thing is to be able to have a way to identify what it is, what are the key assets, what are the key areas of challenges, but then take that data and bring it into your conversation. So WalkScope is a tool that we helped develop with Walk Denver in Denver area for being able to do that. And then some quick 3 pictures on bringing art and children into the conversation. In Philadelphia with the Land Visions Project, looking at 20,000 vacant properties, working with the inner city schools, doing workshops on how to use art to express ideas, having kids take black and white pictures and then color over them to create an image of the future that they would like to see happen. And then bringing that to the kickoff meeting to talk about what are some ways to take that 20,000 vacant properties. That's a huge challenge, but then look at the opportunity that it presents and turn that into some design ideas and creativity. And then the other key thing is to figure out how to get people on the street starting to think about how design features really can impact them. And so what's often called tactical urbanism, I prefer to call it just pop-up design, is just take ideas around biking and walking and then just experiment with it. So use washable paint, use pallets and various donations from nurseries and stores, and create pop-up cafes and events on the street. But to do it in a way that people can actually not only experiment with those design features, but also celebrate the place that they live in. So the other key thing around bringing information into the decision-making process is using scenario planning and impact analysis tools. And with that, we've used a number of tools through the 14 years of our work. Very excited about some of the new tools that come out that allow you to do, in this case, Urban Canvas and Urban Sim with Autodesk, allowing you to change things in the spreadsheet side of the table and seeing it automatically on the 3D visualization, and vice versa, being able to change things on your 3D side and then be able to see the impacts of that on the other side. And then finally, the mention of planning fatigue and trying to get away from having just roundtable meetings where people get, and this looks like it's getting stuck a little bit, is how to get people really more in it, rolling up their sleeves and thinking about the different things. It's a very, I don't know why it's so choppy, but the main thing to see is that we took a hack that was developed by the Carnegie Mellon, Johnny Lee Chung, who was with the Carnegie Mellon Human Interactive Lab, and he took a Wii remote and he put it on a projector and he figured out how to use that with an infrared pen so that it mimicked mouse movements. And that allowed people to go through scenario planning. For us, it meant that we could shine it down on a table and create essentially a large iPhone that made it possible for people to interact with the maps and go through scenario planning. And sorry, it's not going to get to the actual example where we used it on Cape Cod. For some reason, it's going very slowly. So with that, I wanted to finish with just going back to the big picture and how we think, how we design our communities and cities has a huge impact into the long future. And very simple things that we can do to make our communities more walkable and livable can make a huge difference. Joe Cartwright, who was the founder of WalkScope, and was able to look at some of the differences between communities and their WalkScope scores, was able to see a $500 to $5,000 difference in housing prices as a result of increased point in the WalkScore score. Other examples where building walkable communities has a huge impact on the return on investment in terms of people wanting to move to that city and become invested in it. And even when it comes back to health, some of the amazing statistics showing that, for instance, transit riders are 3 times more likely to meet the 30 days of exercise a day that the CDC says is critical for avoiding disease. That those transit riders are much more likely to meet that, and it's because of the way that the mobility and getting people to and from transit, all those things are really important. So finally, it's just connecting the the engagement with the opportunity for people to learn how these things can truly impact their lives and improve the quality of their life that we feel is important.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing with Building Community Workshop. We are a nonprofit community design center with 4 offices, 3 in Texas and a brand new one in Washington, D.C. And we started out as kind of a straightforward architecture firm, but over the last 7 years, that work's expanded a lot, and we've started doing a lot of other kinds of work. So the way that we describe what we do is in terms of these 6 methods of work. So what does that look like? We work with neighborhoods to measure and analyze street conditions to prioritize goals for community-led street improvement plans. We work with residents to produce festivals that celebrate the history of different neighborhoods. This is the Arc on Noah Street in the 10th Street Historic District, which is the oldest freedmen's town in Dallas. And we design things that get built or made, which range from very small to very large. This is Congo Street. This was the first project that our office did, which was the rehab of 6 homes and a storm water management system for a 1-block-long street in South Dallas. And I head up what we call People Organizing Place, which is basically the grassroots planning work of the office. We work with designers, other professionals, nonprofit organizations, and citizen groups to position local stakeholders as experts to organize and shape their neighborhood's future. And we have basically 2 types of projects that we do. We have tools, which neighbors can use either with us or on their own to shape and organize places that are important to them. Or we have city design, which is kind of more like planning or urban design, which are larger scale projects and often combine a number of different tools to achieve certain place-based goals. And that can look like research, design, or something more like traditional planning. And the 3 tools that I'm going to talk about are our little free libraries, Libres, Pop Neighborhood Map, and Neighborhood Stories. And while each of these tools have their own product that result from each process, each of these tools are often the foundation for a longer process. So they're a way to start conversations, they're a way to get to know a neighborhood, both for us to get to know neighbors, also for neighbors to get to know neighbors. And so they're often, they often lead to something larger, more long-term. So Little Free Libraries, Libres, is our take on the well-known Little Free Libraries program. Little Free Libraries, it uses free book exchanges to build community, increase access to books, and support vibrant public spaces. But what makes our Little Free Libraries different from the kind where you can buy a Little Free Library online is our process. We have 2 community partners that we've been working with for a couple of years, Big Thought, which is a literacy and arts organization, and the Dallas Public Library. And we work with those 2 organizations to pair community stewards, which include neighborhood residents, nonprofit organizations, schools, YMCAs, churches, and other community organizations with designers and artists to design and build custom Little Free Libraries. So as a result of this pairing, the Little Free Libraries often reflect the identity of the neighborhood. The process of working with community members promotes community ownership, encourages more frequent use, and ensures a longevity of each neighborhood, while also transforming the built environment and promoting literacy. It also introduces local designers to BC's process of community engagement. So folks from other firms can get involved and kind of learn how we do what we do in terms of working with communities. By the end of the year, we'll have completed 22 public neighborhood book shelters in West Dallas, South Dallas, and South Oak Cliff, which are also areas that studies have shown have a lack of access to libraries. So each library is owned and cared for by the steward, with the public library providing free books for the first year. And we've found that while free books are a huge draw for these structures, one of the most important outcomes has been the creation of new community spaces, like a place to wait to be picked up after school or after spending time at the Y. The POP neighborhood map is the next project. This is the project that I've been working on the most for the past year. So the POP neighborhood map is the first comprehensive map of the city of Dallas that shows, currently it shows 378 individual neighborhoods in the city. In Dallas, neighborhoods and neighborhood boundaries are not decided by the city, but instead neighborhoods are one of the most basic units of self-organizing. So when folks want to address an issue in a geography that's beyond their own property, they work with neighbors. They go to Crime Watch or homeowners association meetings, and deciding or agreeing on neighborhood boundaries, which defines an area of focus, is kind of the first step in that process of organizing. So for the past 3 years, we've been going to community meetings, public events of all kinds, and asking folks to draw the boundaries of their neighborhoods, telling us, you know, what they like about their neighborhoods, why they chose those boundaries, of what defines what they're calling their neighborhood. Let's see if this works. And then, so the next step in that process has been a digital version of, a digital version of all of the information that we've collected about these neighborhoods. Here we go. So, and also an interactive way for people to contribute that information, right? So now you can go online and draw the boundary of your neighborhood and then tell us about it, what the name of the neighborhood is, whether it's a neighborhood or a super neighborhood. Super neighborhoods are kind of a new interest of ours, which are groupings of neighborhoods. And then the other part of the site is, let's see, well, if it loads, but it's basically, it's a directory of all that information that includes city council information, neighborhood organizations, also any oral histories that we as an organization have collected about that neighborhood. Basically a way for folks to get to know where they live, but also information about how to get involved with what's going on. And the last tool that I'm going to talk about is Neighborhood Stories. It's a research and documentation project that celebrates community identity, history, and culture by showcasing neighborhood histories. The process relies heavily on first-person accounts and delves into private and public archives to amplify neighborhood voices by working directly with residents to document neighborhood narratives and provides a platform to share these stories. The products of this process range from publications to films to exhibits, and I'm going to show you, this is a preview of one of the films that we did.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Plano Senior Center back to the Trinity River Audubon Center. Welcome. Have any of you been on a prior tour here at the center before? So Pam's brought a whole new batch in. Thank you, Pam, for discovering this place and sharing it with so many people in your reach. We have been here since 2008, but there was a point in time when it was a very abused property. It was an illegal landfill and was a real negative asset to this part of the community.
Community protested opening of the illegal dumping at the end of the Woodwood and Avian Street. When the city responded to the complaint in November, they found massive illegal dumping.
I spoke to this assembly in November of '95 when trucks were entering our community and illegally dumping all sorts of material around the clock. They would begin early in the morning when my husband and I would drop our children off at their bus stop. They continued throughout the day and late into the night.
If this problem is law, y'all have done been taken care of. And I don't want people to sit up there saying, I didn't know nothing about it. This problem's been going on for 20 years. This is what you call complete niggerization. How can an 85-acre illegal landfill operate within the city of Dallas? This is complete disrespect for a whole area, and they're right. They don't want to hear no more talk. They want something done.
Well, that's the gist of that. So that was a film that we did with residents of the Deepwood neighborhood that had been fighting an illegal dumping site that had been in operation for over 20 years and is now currently the home of the Audubon Center, which is basically an environmental education center. So that film, which is about 23 minutes, tells the story of how the neighborhood fought to have the dump site cleaned up. So when we do films like that, it usually culminates in an event or a celebration of some kind where we share the film, the resulting products, with the neighbors. And so through these public events and celebrations, Neighborhood Stories also encourages new connections in the neighborhood. At a time when older city neighborhoods are facing intense redevelopment pressures and rapid changes, organized and connected communities are better able to achieve their goals in the face of these challenges. And if anyone's interested in learning more about Neighborhood Stories or Little Free Libraries, there are copies of project guides over there that go through the process of how and why we do these projects.
I'm Mariko. I'm going to take my notepad. And I'm going to walk you through a series of different projects that I've done in a variety of different roles, but the common thread in all of this is this idea of creative civic engagement. And the things that I've been thinking about over the past few years, but most intensely over the past few months as a first-time candidate for a city council, is this idea of play, engagement, bringing in community engagement, but also trust, right? Because we've talked about public participation, we've talked about public planning and fatigue in the planning process, and in this new role that I have right now, I'm seeing so much of it also comes down to trust. What are you going to do with that feedback once I give it to you? And that's something that will be threaded through this talk as well. So just very briefly, I'm an urban planner. Got my master's in city planning at MIT. Worked at the mayor's office of New Urban Mechanics for a bit. Moved over to the Commonwealth. And now I'm the managing director of a place called the Engagement Lab at Emerson College. And these are all the little touchstones in throughout all these experiences. So, we in the Office of New Urban Mechanics, we used Legos for civic engagement and tried to bring in new participation and new involvement. And this is one of the experiments that we did in East Boston around a bicycle transit project. And this is also, a great little photo of some rapid prototyping of signage there. We had, these little girls draw out what they thought would be a great sign, and then we printed them out on a vinyl cutter and slapped them up on a BTD, a Boston Transportation Department sign, and we rapidly prototyped right there, and it was great. And then now at the Engagement Lab, we are an applied research lab that focuses on new media and also applied research for creative civic engagement. And it's really this idea of leveraging the power of play. And so one of the things that we've done more recently is this project with the UNDP. This is a photo from actually this past month in Egypt, in Cairo, where we led a training of the trainers workshop there. So the idea behind this is a design thinking workshop. We brought in a bunch of trainers, and one of the products that came out of this workshop, which was really exciting, it was by Egyptians, it was for Egyptians, and it was a card game that started the difficult conversation of violence against women prevention. And so these trainers came in, or these new designers came in, we trained them, they developed a product, but we also then trained them how to train other trainers so they could go into their communities and create a multiplier effect. And so this is an ongoing project that we're supporting, and this is just another idea of not just using digital engagement, but analog engagement. One of the other projects that we're doing there is called the Boston Civic Media Consortium. So Boston Civic Media, there's this whole new field of civic media. And what is civic media? Well, it's still being defined at this time. But there are key researchers across a variety of different universities here, MIT, Harvard, Emerson, and the list goes on. And so what we've done is we've created a consortium that's both researchers and practitioners. And one of the projects that's come out of it is community IRB. So the idea behind a community IRB, internal review board, is that oftentimes researchers will come into a community, and many of the communities here in Boston are very, very, very well studied. But what happens is that the data never gets back to the community. The findings never get back to the community, and if it does, it's maybe 2 or 3 years later, and it's in a report, and it doesn't. Maybe the urgency of the moment has passed in that community. So what if we could facilitate a conversation that creates some sort of community IRB or MOU or whatever you want to call it, but it's so that when a community is approached, they can say, hey, we actually want this information to come out of this research, and it would be really helpful for us. But what that also does is it's also a study on data literacy. It's a study on what kind of information do you want, and that is another participatory process as well. Another project that we're doing is called At Stake. This was conceived originally as a card game, but we just got a grant from the Knight Foundation to make it a mobile app. But really what it is it's a card game. This is the front, rural youth, and the back of the card, and what you do is you get a deck, and you are assigned a role randomly, and there is one decider who doesn't get a role at all, but just to decide, and you debate an issue from your perspective. And so it's this role-playing guide around negotiation, around engagement. It's it can be democracy building, and it is a deliberation role-playing game, which is really exciting, and soon in the next year or so it'll be a mobile app as well. Prior to my work at Emerson, at the Engagement Lab, I was at the state, and there I started the state's open data initiative on more greater transparency and accountability. And so what open data does is you publish data in a machine readable format, and many of the applications, perhaps it's to get your take the T easier, is powered by open data. So it's a different type of engagement. It's a digital engagement where the city or the state itself is publishing information, and you as a citizen can go online and build something if you want, or you can learn more about your government in terms of their fiscal spending or their transportation network. So now I have to talk about the campaign a little bit, because it's also that is a different kind of civic engagement, and it's a different role. But what's been fascinating to me is this idea, as I've talked about, is this idea of trust. And there are so many issues at stake right now in Cambridge. There's affordable housing. There's an affordable housing crisis. There's access to education. There's transportation issues. And what's been really, really interesting is also the influence of special interest dollars in the election cycle. You expect it at the state level, and at the federal level, but it's actually very, very much at home here in Cambridge across the river. And just to give you a sense of what the state of engagement is, you think in Cambridge it would be very robust, and everyone would be at the decision-making table. But actually, there are 107 more or less thousand people in Cambridge, and only about 66,000 are registered to vote. And of that voter population, only between 15 and 17,000 actually show up to vote in municipal elections. The average statistic of a voter in Cambridge is 54 years old, but the average age of a Cantabrigian is 30 years old. So there's a real wide disparity there. And last year, the election was decided by only 8 votes, if you can believe it. Literally, actually 8 votes. Yeah. So that's right, exactly. So, you know, that's one side. But the other side is that it's a very rich city. There's a $500 million operating budget, and you know, 45% of the public school children in our schools there live at or below the poverty line. So there's a real disparity in terms of who's at the table, what level of engagement, who's making the decisions, are your representatives really representing you at the table? And these are the, you know, these are the questions that I've been thinking through, you know, most intensely recently. And you know, I just want to speak to a little bit about this idea of urban planning and why I became a planner, and I think probably why most of you became planners or architects, is this idea of opportunity. And this idea that we can build our cities to be more accessible, more equitable, more livable. And we all intuitively know that through our zip code is one of the key determining factors of our life success. You know, it's that special algorithm of your transportation and housing and education in your backyard. But, you know, at the end of the day, we can build our cities to be more livable and accessible and equitable, or we can just, you know, live with the status quo. So this idea of bringing more civic engagement, bringing more participation to the table, I think helps to push forward that agenda, and I'm going to leave that there.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to have just one quick question, then I'm going to open up to the people who are here. And I guess it's this. I mean, somewhere Mayor Hines is, this is for all of you, Mayor Hines is looking down at us and seeing paper mache puppets and children's drawings and Noah's Ark in the middle of the street and saying, okay, what exactly is going on here? And I guess my question to you is, where's the tipping point? When does paper mache become, you know, zoning documents, which is in fact really the end product of planning? I mean, I get engagement, but when is it just you're doing these things to make it look like you're engaging, but in the end, I mean, who's really going to work on that planning document? I mean, when does the silly become very real? And I mean, because a skeptic could look at that and say, well, it looks nice, but how are you going to get from that zoning?
But I think that play is a key and an important part of engagement, and you want to make it interesting, but you also want to try to make sure that it does help people then think about new issues. I think a key part of structuring is to try to figure out ways where people can go through iterations of thinking, and then that makes it possible for them to go from maybe the paper mache and the art project, but then to actually playing around with different design elements of your streetscape. And I think that's where the pop-up design is also critical, because then it gives people actually a chance to experience as close as possible a representation of what it might look like when you put a permanent, when you put in some sort of permanent installation. But play, you know, serious play is, you know, serious gaming is something that I guess the Emerson group, you know, talks about, but it's, you know, thinking about making sure that there's some important questions and thought process built into that gaming. Go ahead.
I guess I would say that the tension there is the quantifying of the experts, or the qualifying of the experts, right? You've got the urban planning expert who sits in front of CAD and actually moves the things into the right place. And then you have the person who's going to live that city. And actually sometimes that CAD person actually also has to live there as well. Sometimes in maybe a different part of town or not. So I would say that that's maybe not the right question. It's how do we make sure that that person actually drawing the zoning is in an ongoing dialogue with all the other experts who have an input or who have a stake in the city, so that we don't have something like an engagement phase, but the planning process is an engagement and it never ends, right? Down to where the planning is kind of like printed as a paper document, down to the kind of document or the kind of public presentation there is of the document. Is it a document, or is that not the most publicly accessible way to present a planning idea or a planning system for the next 15 years? So I think we sort of have to change our entire paradigm of how we imagine planning and the assumptions that we make of who ultimately is Like, is there an ultimate, or are we all in it together all the time?
And I think the arc on Noah Street is a good example of how we were trying to work on creating that connection. It was part of a 5-part public art series that looked at the history of what is the oldest freedmen's town in Dallas, and is in danger of losing its historic status because of the number of houses that have been demolished because of various reasons, absentee landlords, various just disrepair. So having this year-long public art series be the beginning of a conversation about what historic preservation means in a neighborhood that has such a historic significance, but is in danger of losing its status. What does that mean for the future of the development of that neighborhood? What does it mean for building requirements? How can we rethink the historic ordinance that was put in place when there were a lot more buildings that were deemed historically significant? And that was the beginning of this phase of this conversation that was meant to lead into a master planning process with the city, which has not happened yet. And that was supposed to begin about a year ago. And so we're in conversation, or we're trying to figure out now what happens if that plan actually never goes into practice. How do we continue to have all of this momentum that we've built up over the past year of relationships and kind of organizations that have come out of these conversations that we've been having and this work that we've done? What does that mean for the future of this neighborhood?
Right. Did you want to jump in there?
Have you ever been to some of these planning meetings or some of these public forums? I mean, they're really boring. I've been to so many lately, and it's hard to sit through. And if they're not boring, they are daunting. So they're inaccessible, I think, to the average citizen that would want to actually comment because it's a little daunting or a little bit too formal. So I think the idea and the use of play to make things more accessible and more engaging is really, really, really important. You're not going to get the kind of feedback from your everyday citizen at a forum like the ones I think so many of us are used to. And so the trick is, how do you then begin to incorporate that? And I think that one of the pieces are, that we still have yet to accomplish is figuring out this iterative way to have these more formal public planning processes and not necessarily have to be there in person every single time. You should be able to have that interaction with your government in a two-way stream, both in person and online. So you don't have to, skip dinner with your family or not get paid for work when you're supposed to be working during those hours.
And it looks fun. It looks like
And it looks fun, right?
Yeah, great. All right. Well, there's got to be questions out here.
I think to follow up on your question about the zoning code, the zoning code is sort of a regulatory system that tells you what you can do and what you can't do. But within that, there's a malleable space for city making. And I kind of think a lot of projects and the groups that we've seen really sort of occupy that space. And the act of city making itself can, fold back and inform regulation, right? And I think part of what our responsibility as citizens is to fully inhabit that space. And what all these tools do is kind of create a way of doing that. So in a way, my comment is equally a response to your comment, as much as it is to say that was what was really empowering about all the presentations, was that it does create an opportunity for us to take something that's inaccessible, archaic, old-fashioned, and say, how do we bring this into our own city and make the city that we want to live in based on the regulations, and then hopefully change the regulations that don't work for us. So that's just a comment that I.
And you're going to participate? What do you do? Are you?
I'm an architect as well, and I have a group. I recently moved here from Chicago, and I have a group called Territory, which engages young people in the act of designing the healthier cities for themselves.
And you live in Boston?
Right now, I live in Cambridge.
In Cambridge. Are you going to participate in the Cambridge replanning, or?
If I'm invited to, I will.
I think an important aspect of playing and city making is not planning, but just doing. Just building
models of cities from, or communities from scratch, which has, you know, been done throughout history, like People's Park in, I think, Berkeley in the late 60s, and more recently Occupy Boston and Occupy Wall Street. I mean, they were more about protest than play, but there were play aspects of it as far as building, you know, model neighborhoods was concerned. And to some extent, it was also Tent City in the Back Bay, which gave rise to the affordable housing development that's there. And most recently in South Boston, the Lawn on D, which is a model for play for both children and adults. It was, you know, a temporary space, and it's evolved into a community asset. So sometimes just doing, even if it sometimes goes against regulation, is brings it to the public attention, you know, as an alternative to just sitting in boring planning meetings, as you said.
Great, got it, thank you. Go ahead, Ken.
One of the important things that I think we're dancing around, but is I think really important, particularly given, you know, the planners and architects in the room, is you really, really need to put a lot of thought into the question at the very beginning: why are you doing engagement? And then once you've answered that, then that's how you design what you're doing. Because if there's a serious question, or there's people that are you know, at each other's throats over an issue, and you gamify it to the point where they feel like you're not taking them seriously, you can really backfire. And so you really need to make sure you're thinking about, why are we asking people questions? What do we need from their feedback? And, you know, but with huge respect towards the different ways that people communicate, and figuring out how to then tap into that information. But whenever you're doing engagement, you should be thinking of it from the perspective of a promise. Like, if I want someone to spend their valuable time coming to my meeting, or even just because I was able to intercept them on the sidewalk, why am I taking their time, and what's my promise to them in terms of the feedback they give me? Because if they feel like they just went through a fun little game, but then their information doesn't have any shape on the decisions we make, I think we've failed as policy and decision makers.
Can I just reflect on this gentleman's comment? Or do we,
Yeah, go ahead.
Just-
And then we
just-
have a comment here,
Yep.
and then the back, and then there's this guy over here. Okay.
Just quickly to say, I'm so with you on the idea of building and play building, and especially using public space as a space and a time to try out these alternate ideas. And maybe they stick, maybe they don't, but it's a space to kind of, again, suspend yourself from your everyday and try on a new way of relating, and a new way of actually physically building and tasting that city as a prototype. So.
And the community building.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi, my name is David. I'm a BAC student. I had a question in regards to, how do you actually start to take this information that you've curated through your creative actions? How do you start to distill it into the analysis that actually has a second life afterwards to create a sustainable business, considering all of your firms are much different from each other? And how do you actually engage into the community with that?
Anyone want to jump on that?
There are two different questions. The one was in terms of the, you know, the creative ways that you're collecting data, then how do you actually make that data turn it into valuable information? And then the other question is, how do we make what we do into a profession? And so, I mean, the first one I think is, again, why it's really important to map out what you're trying to accomplish with engagement and the different folks that you're trying to get involved in activities, because that will really influence how you're collecting that information. And the storytelling and the building a sense of place and a sense of community, then it's really just collecting that information and sharing it in a way that people can kind of see how it resonates with them. And where there's sort of a common ground. But then if it's really important to get data that will then show where's a hot spot that needs to be addressed, then what sort of platform you create, I think, is critical. So Lizzie's example in Dallas of collecting that data on a mapping tool, make sure you ask the right questions, and then you have that data that will really help inform where you focus on those things. The other question I'll leave to other people.
There's Lizzie, you want to jump in?
Well, I was just gonna say in terms of a profession or having an office that supports people doing this kind of work. I mean, specifically in our office, we are about 30%, I think, fee for service, and the rest is all grant and philanthropy work, like funded. So all of the work that I do is grant and philanthropy funded. I don't have any fee for service work. All of the pop stuff is, NEA funded, various grants that we apply for. But we have other architecture work that I didn't show that is stuff that is fee for service, and that funds a lot of the other work.
There's a comment in the back.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Hurst. I was really struck by how iterative it's clear that all these different processes were, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you've learned about honing into what the right questions are, what the right project is, and how things shift as you're developing these different activities.
Rika, you've been quiet over there. Do you want to?
So for the design process that we teach at the Engagement Lab, we build in space for the iterative design, and we try to make it as human-centered as possible. So you give space to the designers, and you let them, and you also create a safe enough space so that it's okay if your prototype or your design doesn't work. A lot of the design that we do is in tangible kind of paper prototypes so that it's fast and inexpensive and easy, and it's also a low barrier to entry where you're allowed to throw things away if they don't work out.
So my name's Ben, and I live in Dudley Square, right outside of Dudley Square, and my question directly is, do you ever work one-on-one with developers? Because the scary thing to me that there's two sort of disparate things happening. One is very, very kind of tactile play, which is amazing, and on the other hand, you have these, and we kind of live in these think tanks, and which architects and planners do, and we kind of imagine things. But then on the other hand, you have actual buildings for sale and lots that are empty, that are actually sitting, foreclosed or vacant, and developers are just sort of buying them. And just to preface the question, because I'd love to hear your responses. In Dudley Square, there was a brand new building built, which is the Mass Department of Education, I think, and there was something that went really, really right at the ground floor, where you have all these incredible local businesses that are doing, the Haley House has now a craft pizza place that's doing, like, they dedicate certain areas to classes and all this great stuff. There's a locally owned clothing store, as well as other stuff. Then I live kind of further down Dudley Street towards Upton's Corner, and triangulated between Andrews, actually, almost near where the city is calling this area. They've coined it New Market, which is almost not a place, actually, but there are other parcels that are being built that are sort of developed not as smartly. So the neat thing to me would be to get you guys together with developers almost as a checkpoint between, if the BRA basically said, you can buy that building, we'll give you a discount if you spend 6 months workshopping with these people.
So does someone want to, have you had an example where you've worked with a developer directly and, outside of this planning process, and you've done some of your visioning, et cetera? Any of you?
We have not, and I would just say if a developer came to a temporary play zone, we'd be glad to play with them as well.
But they're not necessarily playing with you, the developers, right? This is more of a planning kind of, do you know of any examples of developers?
I don't have any offhand.
Ken's shaking his head. Do you know of something?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, we found that there's, a number of developers that really want to do the right thing. Engagement process can be daunting or just foreign to the point where it's kind of hard to figure out how to actually incorporate it into their decision making. But if there's a process that is either nonprofit, philanthropic, or even public agency supported, that information can really help developers do do the right thing, and there really are, we've found a lot of openness to that. But then the other thing is that there might be just, we find that the biggest opportunity is where there's lots of tension, and so if there's an area where there's a lot of NIMBY resistance to new development, then developers then will work with us, and then that then becomes a role model for how other developers might want to start incorporating that into what they do and how they do it.
So yeah, I was going to ask a related question actually, which is about municipal clients, and if you have worked with them, and if so, how do you have that conversation with them about needing to spend more money on process? Because often, especially smaller towns, they'll go for a much more, as small a process as they can. And if not, how do you think the processes that you guys are developing could inform the processes that we know are happening in the municipal context?
Did anyone field that one? Because I was doing some things over there. Made some business. Was that a comment, Peter? Did you get an answer? You didn't get an answer. Yeah.
So I think, again, we're an art collective, so I may not be the best person to answer this, so take that. But I would say that my interest is more in working with the people on the ground so that when a planning process happens, it doesn't have to be more expensive or the city doesn't have to think about the benevolence of doing engagement, but the population who is affected by a given project is ready and can meet that planner as a group of experts, living experts in the particular area in question with a set of values, a set of issues that they want to discuss, so that they're inviting this so-called urban planning expert to their table instead of the other way around. I think we're really making a lot of assumptions, again, in the way that we phrase these questions and these relationships, and we're interested in kind of flipping that a little bit.
So, I just want to, because we're going to close out, we have a special guest here. Nick Martin is actually in charge of the, or partially in charge of the, actually, right? No one's in charge. The people are in charge. But
I'm definitely not in charge.
But at City Hall, he is the head of planning or the engagement process.
I do communications for the BRA.
For the Boston
Don't
Redevelopment
judge me,
Authority.
we're a much friendlier agency.
We want to get a microphone to you, Nick, because we want to hear from you a little bit, and you may have a question or you may have a comment, but we're glad you're here.
Yeah, happy to talk to anybody about sort of the work that the BRA does after the fact, but while we have the panel together, I was curious, we're doing a variety of planning initiatives, from the citywide plan and Imagine Boston to 2 sort of transit-oriented planning studies in Jamaica Plain and Roxbury, and then 1 in South Boston. Between Andrew and Broadway stations, but I'm curious to hear the group's thoughts on ways of reaching non-English speakers or people that are limited in their English fluency, because so much of our new population in Boston are foreign-born citizens, so curious to hear if there are any sort of ideas or best practices around that area.
Okay, you were in Mexico, right? So Grant, you were probably speaking in Spanish out there.
Yeah. I think it starts in forums like this. Like, none of us are struggling with English. I think that's sort of problematic, right? Who's invited to be a public participant in sessions like this? And I mean, on our end, my collaborator is Colombian, so we sort of automatically reach the Spanish, and I speak Spanish, so we reach that population sort of from the get-go. But I think you have to be vigilant at every single step and at every single moment to again sort of take for granted that anything you say to one resident should be understandable to another. And that has to do with English, it has to do with the vocabulary that you use, it has to do with the meeting structure that you deploy. So you have to be vigilant at every step. Who are we talking to? And are we talking to everyone? And who are we assuming is everyone? So there's no easy answer.
Oh, I'd like to just make a quick comment about, I think one real key component to this is the community organizing aspect. So even starting a couple steps back, how do you even get these communities, or even native English speakers, how do you get them in the same room at the same time for the meeting. And I think that has to do, you have to meet them in person. You have to go and knock on their doors and leave flyers and remind them to come and pull them out to the meetings. And that should be in a variety of different languages, and then bring them into the meeting too.
Yeah, there are a number of important techniques and best practices around the country. Another technique that's really critical is what is often called the trusted advocate, identifying people that are in the community that are the go-to for advice and information, and meeting with them and finding out what strategies, what sort of things would work. And there's a lot of discussion about getting people in the room. Sometimes it's not getting people in the room, it's actually go-to-them strategies. Like in Albany, we had stoop surveys where we went out and met with people on their stoop. We found in Colorado, the Latino and Hispanic community, they're actually much easier to get engaged in a conversation if we're meeting with them. Just partly because there's a number of celebrations and events that we're able to tap into and then make part of the conversation. So it's figuring out what sort of things will resonate well with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that covers it pretty well. We go to a lot of Crime Watch meetings, a lot of homeowners association meetings, spend a lot of time in churches and other places where people are already naturally coming together to talk about these concerns, identifying neighborhood leaders and working with them to make sure that the audiences are being reached and making sure that the languages are covered and everybody understands what we're talking about.
Well, we did a lot here today. Gretchen, what's the next topic is on what?
On the cultural plan.
The cultural plan, and we don't have a date yet, right?
We don't have a
But it's
date yet.
around 2 months from now.
Around 2 months.
Okay,
December.
so folks, that's the next time. We hope you'll come back to us. We can give a good round of applause for our panel. Thank you for coming out tonight. Have a great night.
We're all just trying to get somewhere. We're trying to get to work, we're trying to get to school, we're trying to get to our kids' soccer practice, we're trying to get to a show. It doesn't matter if you're taking a bus or a train or a fancy car or a hoverboard 30 years from now. What remains the same and what was the same 100 years ago, what will be the same at the Olympics if they're here, what will be the same in 2030 is that you've got a city full of people and they're all just trying to get somewhere.